The brand read CHATTEL in raised angry scars that would never fade. Marcus Kane found her by Devil's Creek that April morning, blood seeping through her torn dress, begging him to kill her quick before they found her again. One look at what they'd burned into her thigh told him everything she was escaped property from the debt camps where men had found legal ways to own women again. This is their story of blood freedom and the price of looking away. Follow me to the end, friends, and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale of courage travels. The creek ran cold that April morning, cutting through the Texas limestone like nature's own blade had carved it there. Marcus Kane knelt at the water's edge, his canteen submerged in the clear stream, when he heard a sound that didn't belong to these hills. Not the mockingbird's morning call or the rustle of live oak leaves, but something broken, something human. He found her 20 yards downstream, collapsed against a fallen cottonwood, her blue calico dress torn and mud-stained. Blood seeped through the fabric at her shoulder, spreading dark and wet. She couldn't have been more than 20, with dark hair matted with dirt and sweat. When Marcus approached, her eyes snapped open, green as bottle glass and twice as sharp. She scrambled backward against the log, one hand pressed to her wound, the other clutching at her torn skirt. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice raw as sandpaper. "Just stay back." Marcus stopped, raising his hand slowly. He'd seen that look before in the war, and men who'd witnessed too much felt too much. Fear so deep it carved itself into the bones. "Not here to hurt you, miss," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, like he was gentling a spooked horse. "You're bleeding bad. Need that wound tended." She laughed, then a sound sharp enough to cut glass. "Hurt me." Her gaze fixed on something past his shoulder, seeing things that weren't there. "Mister, if you got any kindness in you at all, you'll just kill me fast. Don't make it slow, like they did with the others." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd heard whispers in the towns, talk of things happening to women caught in the wrong circumstances when the law looked the other way. Things that made decent men sick to consider. "Nobody's killing anybody," he said. "Let me look at that shoulder." "No." She pulled her knees up, making herself small as a child. "You touch me, you'll see what they did. Then you'll know, and you'll either finish what they started or try to take me back for the bounty. Try me." Something in his tone must have reached through her terror, because she went still, studying his face with those green eyes. Marcus had learned patience in the war, how to wait out artillery fire, how to sit quiet while death whistled overhead. He used that patience now, crouched by the creek, like a man with all the time in the world. The morning grew warmer. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing off the limestone bluffs. The creek murmured its ancient song, carrying last night's rain toward the Guadalupe River. Finally she spoke. "My name's Isabella Reeves. Most call me Izzy." "Marcus Kane." He touched the brim of his hat. "Pleased to know you, Miss Reeves." "Don't be." She winced as she shifted against the log. "Nothing pleasant about knowing me anymore. I'm stolen goods that ran away. That makes me a thief of my own self." Marcus studied her face, the sharp cheekbones that spoke of recent hunger, the stubborn set of her jaw despite the fear. "Let me see that wound, Izzy. Got clean bandages in my saddlebags. Whatever else happened, that shoulder needs tending, or you'll bleed out right here." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, moving like every motion hurt, she let her hand fall away from her shoulder. The fabric was torn in a ragged line, probably from running through thorns and brush. Marcus could see where a bullet had creased her deep enough to bleed steady, but not life-threatening if kept clean. He moved careful and slow, the way he'd approach a wounded animal. When he touched the torn calico to examine the wound better, Izzy flinched but didn't pull away. "This'll heal clean," he said. "Bullet just kissed you. Lucky." "Lucky." The word came out bitter as wormwood. "That's me. Lucky Izzy Reeves." As Marcus worked cleaning the wound with creek water, he noticed other things. Bruises fading yellow-green along her arms, a split lip that had healed crooked, rope burns around her wrists still raw and seeping. And when the torn fabric shifted, revealing more of her left leg, he saw something that made his hands go completely still. On the pale skin of her inner thigh, burned deep and permanent, was a mark. Not an accident. not a scar from some mishap with a cooking fire. This was deliberate, precise, a word pressed into living flesh with heated metal claiming ownership like you'd mark cattle. The word was chattel. Izzy saw where he was looking and jerked the fabric down her face, going white as creek foam. "Now you know," she whispered. "Now you see what I am." Marcus sat back on his heels, his jaw working. In 4 years of war, he'd seen men do terrible things to each other. He'd thought he'd witnessed the worst of human cruelty when Confederate artillery cut down his unit at Antietam. But this marking a woman like livestock, this was something else entirely. "I see what they did to you," he said finally, "not what you are." Tears came then, silent and steady. Izzy covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking. "They had a whole compound," she said through her fingers. "Called it a work farm, but it wasn't for farming. Women who couldn't pay their debts, or whose menfolk ran off and left them owing money, or who just got unlucky when the law changed. They took us there and—" She couldn't finish. Marcus felt something hot and violent rise in his chest. The same feeling he'd had when he found those Confederate prisoners tortured by his own unit. But this wasn't about war. This was about men who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. "How'd you get out?" Izzy lowered her hands, her eyes distant. "Fire. Place caught fire 3 nights back. Guard who was supposed to be watching me was too drunk to notice I'd been working my ropes loose for weeks. When the smoke started, everyone ran to fight the flames. I ran the other way." She looked down at her torn dress, her bare feet bleeding from running. "Been running since. They got dogs, trackers, men who make their living hunting down property." "Well," Marcus said, standing and offering her his hand, "you can stop running now." She stared at his outstretched palm like it might bite her. "You don't understand. Men like that, they don't let their property just walk away. They'll come looking. And when they find me, let them look." Marcus kept his hand steady. "They'll find me instead." For the first time since he'd found her, something shifted in Izzy's face. Not trust that would take time, but maybe the faintest possibility of it. She took his hand. Her fingers were cold and thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. Marcus helped her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed from blood loss. "Got a cabin about 2 miles from here," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it's got walls and a roof and a door that bars from the inside. You can rest there while that shoulder heals." "Why?" The question came out sharp. "Why would you help me? What do you want?" Marcus thought about that as he whistled for his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Amos, who came picking his way through the brush. He thought about the empty cabin he'd built with his own hands, after mustering out about the long nights when the war memories came calling. "Maybe I'm tired of seeing the strong prey on the weak," he said. "Maybe I figure a man who won't help a woman in trouble ain't much of a man at all." He helped Izzy up onto Amos's back, then swung up behind her. She held herself stiff at first, every muscle tensed like she was ready to bolt. But as they rode through the morning shadows, following deer trails and creek beds toward his hidden valley, he felt some of that tension ease. The cabin sat in a clearing ringed by cedar and oak built low and solid against the Texas wind. Smoke still rose from the chimney he'd banked the fire before leaving that morning to check his trap lines. "It's not much," Marcus said as he helped Izzy down from the horse. She stood in his dooryard looking at the small vegetable garden, the split-rail fence, the rain barrel catching water from the eaves. "It's peaceful," she said, and something in her voice made it sound like the finest compliment she could give. Inside the cabin was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs nearby. A bed in the corner covered with a quilt his mother had made before the war. A shelf holding a Bible and a few other books. Pegs on the wall for his rifle and coat. "You can have the bed," Marcus said. "I'll make do with blankets by the fire." Izzy turned to look at him, and for the first time her expression held something besides fear. Confusion, maybe. Like kindness was a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "I don't understand you," she said. "Nothing to understand." Marcus stirred the coals in the fireplace, adding kindling until flames caught and danced. "You're hurt and scared and got nowhere else to go. I got space and food and time. Seems simple enough." But as he watched her settle gingerly into one of his chairs, her hand unconsciously smoothing down her skirt to hide the brand on her thigh. Marcus knew nothing about this was going to be simple at all. The first 3 days passed like a careful dance between two wounded creatures. Marcus moved through his routines, checking his snares, tending his small garden-mending harness leather, while Izzy sat by the window watching him with the wariness of someone who'd learned that kindness usually came with a price. She barely spoke those first mornings, just nodded when he offered her coffee or beans, shook her head when he asked if she needed anything. Her shoulder was healing clean, the angry red fading to pink. But Marcus could see other wounds that ran deeper than flesh. On the fourth morning, he found her standing by the small mirror he'd hung near the wash basin, a cracked piece of glass he'd salvaged from an abandoned homestead. She was staring at her reflection like she didn't recognize the face looking back. "Used to have longer hair," she said without turning around. It was the most words she'd spoken since telling him her name. Marcus paused in the doorway, a bucket of fresh water in his hands. "It grows back. They cut it off first thing." Her fingers touched the ragged ends that barely reached her shoulders. Said long hair was vanity. Said vanity had to be beaten out of us. She turned from the mirror and Marcus saw something raw in her eyes. "You got scissors." "I do. Why?" "Want to cut it proper, clean-like." She managed a ghost of a smile. "Tired of looking like something the cat dragged in." Marcus set down the water bucket and fetched his shaving kit from the shelf. Inside was a small pair of scissors he used to trim his beard when he bothered with such things. "You sure about this?" Izzy nodded and settled into the chair by the fire. "Been thinking I might try to look like myself again. See if there's anything left worth looking at." Working careful as a barber, Marcus trimmed her hair until it fell neat and even around her face. Dark waves caught the firelight, bringing out hints of auburn he hadn't noticed before. When he finished, Izzy looked younger somehow, the sharp angles of her cheekbones softened. "Better?" she asked, touching the newly trimmed ends. "You look like a person again," Marcus said, then immediately wished he could take the words back. "I know what you mean." Izzy stood and walked to the cracked mirror, studying her reflection. "They tried to make us forget we were people, made us answer to numbers instead of names, fed us slop from a trough, worked us 16 hours a day." She traced a finger along her jawline. "Some of the women, after a while, they started believing it, started thinking maybe that's all they really were, property, like the papers said." Marcus gathered up the fallen hair, tossing it into the fire where it curled and vanished in the flames. "What kept you from believing it?" Izzy was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Anger. Pure, stubborn anger. Every time they tried to break me down, something inside me got madder. Figured if I was going to die, I'd die knowing I was still Isabella Reeves, not just number 23 branded on a list." That evening, as rain drummed against the cabin roof, Izzy surprised him by helping prepare supper. She moved around his small kitchen area with practiced efficiency, cutting vegetables while he fried salt pork in his iron skillet. They worked without talking, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Companionable rather than fearful. "You got any family?" she asked as they sat down to eat. "Had a brother, Joseph." Marcus pushed beans around on his plate. "Lost him at Chancellorsville. Pa died of pneumonia the winter before I enlisted. Ma followed him 6 months later. Doc said it was fever, but I know better. She just couldn't bear to be left behind." "I'm sorry." "Long time ago now." He looked up at her. "What about you?" Izzy's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Had parents. Small farm outside Weatherford. When the war ended, carpetbaggers came through with new laws about property taxes. We couldn't pay what they demanded. Pa tried to fight it in court, but the judge..." She shrugged. "The judge was getting a cut. They took the farm. Pa died of a heart attack watching them auction off our land. Ma lasted through the winter, but pneumonia took her come spring." "That when you ended up at that place?" "No." Izzy set down her fork, her appetite apparently gone. "Went to Fort Worth, tried to find work. Met a man named Samuel Hartley, who said he ran a boarding house for young ladies, said he'd help me find employment. Seemed respectable. Well-dressed, spoke proper." Her voice went flat. "By the time I figured out what kind of employment he was offering, it was too late. The papers were already signed supposedly by me, though I never touched a pen. The law said I owed him for room and board, for clothes. I never asked for food I could barely stomach. Interest compounded daily. The debt grew faster than any person could work it off. How many others? At the compound, 30, maybe 40. Hard to say. Women came and went. Some got sold to other places when their debts got traded like cattle futures. Some just disappeared. The rain kept falling, drumming harder against the roof. Marcus wanted to ask more about how long she'd been trapped, about the men who'd done this to her, but he could see the cost of what she'd already told him in the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. "Tomorrow I'll ride into Columbus," he said instead. "Need supplies anyway. Medicine for that shoulder. Maybe some cloth for a proper dress." Izzy's head snapped up. "You can't. Someone might recognize—" "Nobody's going to recognize you. Your hair's different now. You'll be wearing clean clothes. Besides, Columbus is 20 miles from here. Whoever's looking for you won't expect you to surface in a town like that." "You don't know these men." Fear crept back into her voice. "They got connections everywhere. Bounty hunters, lawmen they own, people who owe them money or favors. They put the word out about runaway property, offer rewards. Then we'll be careful." Marcus reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Her fingers were cold, always cold, like the fear had settled into her bones. "You can't hide in this cabin forever, Izzy. Sooner or later, you got to step back into the world." She stared down at his hand, covering hers. "Why are you doing this, really?" "You could have pointed me toward Mexico, given me a few dollars, wished me luck. You could have collected the bounty yourself. It's probably substantial." It was a fair question. Marcus had been asking himself the same thing for 4 days now. He could have done exactly that, stayed uninvolved, minded his own business, gone back to his quiet life of hunting and trapping and trying to forget the war. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel like the world's got no place for you," he said finally. "After the war, when I came back here, everything looked the same but felt different. Like I was a ghost walking through my old life. Like I'd seen too much to ever be clean again." He turned her hand over, studying the calluses on her palm, the thin white scars that spoke of hard work and harder times. "Maybe we both need to remember what it feels like to be human again." Izzy's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't pull her hand away. "I don't know how to do that anymore. Be human, I mean. Feel things that aren't fear or anger or shame. We'll figure it out together." That night, Marcus lay by the fire, listening to the rain and the soft sounds of Izzy's breathing from the bed across the room. Sometime in the small hours, he heard her cry out, not loud, just a small sound of distress that pulled him instantly awake. He found her sitting up in bed, staring at nothing, her body rigid with whatever nightmare had claimed her sleep. "Izzy?" He kept his voice low, gentle. "You all right?" She turned toward him, and in the dying firelight, he could see tears on her cheeks. "I dreamed I was back there. Could smell the smoke, hear the screams. Sometimes I think I'll never really get away. Part of me will always be in that place." Marcus rose from his bedroll and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked darkness. "I used to dream about the war every night. Saw Joseph getting shot over and over again. Heard cannon fire in every thunderstorm." He turned back to her. "Dreams fade if you give them time. The real world gets stronger than the nightmares eventually." "You believe that?" "I'm starting to." In the morning, the rain had stopped and sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, turning the wet world outside into something that sparkled. Izzy stood at the door, breathing deep of the clean air. "Smells like growing things," she said. "Spring's coming on strong now." Marcus joined her in the doorway. "Few more weeks, wildflowers will be everywhere, bluebonnets thick as carpet." "I always loved spring." Something soft entered her voice. "Pa used to say spring was God's way of reminding folks that nothing stays broken forever." "Smart man, your pa." "He was." Izzy stepped out onto the small porch, lifting her face to the sun. "Maybe we could go to Columbus today, if you still want to." Marcus studied her profile, noting the determined set of her chin despite the lingering fear in her eyes. "You sure?" "No." She turned to look at him, and for the first time since he'd found her by the creek, she smiled a real smile that reached her eyes. "But I'm tired of being scared, tired of hiding. If I'm going to live in this world again, I reckon I better start somewhere." As they prepared for the ride to town, Marcus watched Izzy braid her newly trimmed hair with careful fingers. She'd washed her face and hands in the basin, scrubbing away the last traces of dirt and fear. In a spare shirt and an old pair of pants cinched tight with rope, she looked small but determined. "Ready?" he asked, checking his rifle one more time before securing it to his saddle. Izzy nodded, though he could see her hands shake slightly as she adjusted the hat he'd given her. "Ready as I'll ever be." They rode out into the morning, leaving the safety of the hidden valley behind. But for the first time since finding her by the creek, Marcus thought he glimpsed something in Izzy's face that wasn't fear or pain or desperate hope. It looked like courage. Columbus sat in a fold of the Colorado River Valley, a handful of buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. The general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a few other establishments served the scattered farms and ranches of the area. Marcus felt Izzy tense behind him as they rode into town, her hands gripping his belt tight enough to leave marks. He'd given her his spare coat to wear over the borrowed clothes, and she'd pulled the hat low over her face, but he could feel her anxiety radiating like heat from a fire. "Easy," he murmured. "Just getting supplies and heading home." The general store smelled of leather and tobacco, pickled goods, and kerosene. Mrs. Garrett, the storekeeper's wife, looked up from her ledger as they entered, her curious gaze taking in Izzy's borrowed clothes and nervous demeanor. "Morning, Marcus," she said with the careful politeness of someone who knew better than to ask too many questions. "What can I help you with today?" "Need some medicine?" Marcus said, stepping slightly in front of Izzy. "Carbolic acid and bandages, and maybe some cloth suitable for dressmaking." Mrs. Garrett gathered the requested items while stealing glances at Izzy, who stood silent and still near the door, like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. When the woman brought out several bolts of calico and cotton, Izzy surprised them both by stepping forward. "The blue one?" she said quietly, touching a bolt of sky-colored cotton printed with tiny white flowers. "If that's all right." "Of course it is." Mrs. Garrett's expression softened. "Pretty choice. Brings out your eyes." As Mrs. Garrett measured and cut the fabric, Marcus bought coffee flour, salt, and other necessities. The normalcy of it, the everyday business of purchasing supplies, seemed to calm Izzy somewhat. She even ventured to look at some ribbons displayed near the counter, though she didn't ask for any. They were loading their purchases into Marcus's saddlebags when trouble found them. "Well, I'll be damned." The voice came from behind them, rough with drink despite the early hour. Marcus turned to see a man weaving slightly on his feet outside the saloon across the street. He was tall and thick-bodied, with greasy hair and clothes that spoke of hard riding and little washing. "Thought I recognized that walk," the drunk continued, his voice carrying clear across the street. "Hey there, girl, come here. Let me get a better look at you." Izzy went rigid beside him. Marcus stepped between her and the approaching man, his hand resting casual-like on the butt of his Colt. "You got business with us, friend?" The drunk stopped a few feet away, squinting at Izzy. "Might do. Depends on whether this little filly's got a particular mark on her that would make her worth considerable money to certain interested parties." "Don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." The drunk grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "See, there's been word put out about some missing merchandise. Valuable merchandise that walked away from its rightful owners. Folks offering good money for information about its whereabouts." By now, other people had started to notice the commotion. A few men emerged from the saloon, drawn by the raised voices. Mrs. Garrett stood in her store doorway, wringing her hands. Even the blacksmith had stopped his hammering to watch. "You're drunk," Marcus said. "Go sleep it off." "Maybe so, but I got eyes." The man tried to peer around Marcus at Izzy. "That one's got the look. Scared and skittish, trying to hide herself. Why don't you lift that skirt and show us what's marked on that pretty leg of yours, sweetheart?" The words hit Izzy like a physical blow. Marcus heard her sharp intake of breath, felt her take a step backward. When he glanced back at her, he saw all the progress they'd made, the small steps toward courage and hope crumbling in her face. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice gone cold and flat as January ice. But the drunk was emboldened now by the growing audience. "Come on, darling, just a quick peek. Prove you're not what I think you are, and we can all go about our business. Of course, if you are what I think." He licked his lips. "Well, there's men who pay handsomely for the return of runaway stock." The word stock hung in the air like poison. Marcus could feel the mood of the crowd shifting. Some looked uncomfortable at the drunk's crude talk, but others were listening with the sharp attention of men who smelled profit. "Last warning," Marcus said. "Or what?" The drunk laughed. "You going to shoot me over some used-up—" Marcus's fist caught him square in the jaw, dropping him like a sack of grain. The drunk hit the dirt, hard-rolled once, and lay still. For a moment, the street was silent except for the distant sound of a dog barking. Then voices erupted all around them, some angry, some approving, all curious about what would happen next. "Come on," Marcus said to Izzy, taking her arm. "We're leaving." But as they moved toward their horse, one of the men from the saloon called out, "Hold on there! That man might have been drunk, but what if he was right? What if she has escaped property? Then maybe there's reward money to be had." "Reward money's blood money," Marcus said, helping Izzy onto the horse. "Any man who'd take it ought to look in the mirror and ask himself what he's become." "Easy to talk high and mighty when it ain't your money being offered," another voice added. Marcus could feel the crowd's mood turning uglier. These were hard men living in hard times, and the promise of easy money was a powerful lure. He helped Izzy onto their horse, then swung up behind her, all the while keeping his hand near his gun. "Nobody needs to do anything foolish," he said, addressing the crowd. "We're just passing through." "Maybe you are," said the blacksmith, a barrel-chested man with arms like tree trunks. "But maybe we ought to send word to the authorities. Let them sort this out proper-like." "What authorities?" Marcus asked. "The ones who made it legal to brand women like cattle, the ones who look the other way while men build fortunes on suffering." "Law is the law," the blacksmith said stubbornly, "and some laws are wrong." Marcus's voice carried clear across the street. "Every one of you knows it. You've just been pretending not to see it because it's easier than doing something about it." He looked around at the faces watching them. "This woman's done nothing wrong except try to be free. Any of you really want to be the man who sends her back to being branded property?" For a moment the crowd wavered. Then an older man stepped forward, someone Marcus recognized as a local rancher named Thomas Whitmore. "Now, Marcus," Whitmore said in a reasonable tone, "we're not talking about right or wrong here. We're talking about keeping the peace. If this girl belongs to someone—" "She belongs to herself," Marcus said. "Same as you, same as me, same as every person should." "That's a fine sentiment," Whitmore replied. "But it don't change the law." The drunk was starting to stir now, groaning and holding his jaw. When he saw Marcus still mounted and ready to ride, his face twisted with rage. "Don't let them go," he shouted. "That there's a marked woman, I'd stake my life on it. Someone check her leg. You'll see what they burned into her." The crowd pressed closer, and Marcus knew they were moments away from violence. He could fight a few men maybe, but not a whole town. And even if he could, what then? Word would spread. More bounty hunters would come. Izzy would never be safe. "Step back," he said, drawing his pistol. "All of you." The sight of the gun sobered some of the crowd, but not all. The blacksmith hefted his hammer. Whitmore had his hand on the rifle slung across his shoulder. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, son," Whitmore said. "We're reasonable men. We'll make sure she's treated fair while we sort this out." "Like hell you will." Marcus backed their horse toward the edge of town, keeping his gun trained on the crowd. "I've seen how reasonable men treat women they think of as property." Behind him, Izzy whispered, "Just leave me. Save yourself." "Not happening," he said without turning around. They'd almost reached the town limits when the drunk called out one last time. "Run all you want. Word's already spreading. Victor Blackwood's got men everywhere, and they'll find you eventually. You can't hide stolen goods forever." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Victor Blackwood. He'd heard that name whispered in army camps, always with disgust and fear. A man who'd found ways to profit from the war's chaos, who'd built an empire on other people's misery. As they rode hard away from Columbus, following deer trails and creek beds that would hide their tracks, Marcus felt the weight of what they were up against settling on his shoulders like lead. This wasn't just about local bounty hunters or small-town greed. This was about a man with resources, connections, and the kind of ruthless determination that had made him rich off suffering. Behind him, Izzy wept silently, her tears soaking through his shirt. The hope he'd seen building in her over the past days was gone. replaced by the old familiar despair. "I'm sorry, she whispered. "I'm so sorry I brought this on you." "Nothing to be sorry for," Marcus said, though his mind was already racing ahead planning their next moves. They'd need supplies, weapons, a place to make a stand. Because one thing was certain now, Victor Blackwood knew where to find them, and he wouldn't give up easily. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet after their flight from Columbus. Marcus kept watch from the cabin's single window rifle, always within reach, while Izzy barely spoke and hardly ate. The blue fabric they'd bought sat untouched on the table, a reminder of hopes that had been crushed under the weight of ugly reality. On the fourth morning, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for weeks to come. "Need to go back," he said, checking his pistol for the third time that morning. Izzy looked up from where she sat mending his spare shirt, busy work to keep her hands occupied. "Back where?" "Columbus. Need to know what we're dealing with, who this Blackwood fellow really is, what kind of men he's got working for him." Marcus holstered the gun and reached for his hat. "Information's the only advantage we got right now." "It's too dangerous." Fear crept into her voice. "What if someone recognizes you? What if they're waiting? Then I'll find out about that too." He knelt beside her chair, taking her work-worn hands in his. "I can't protect you if I don't know what's coming." Izzy's fingers tightened around his. "What if you don't come back?" The question hung between them, heavy, with all the things they hadn't said to each other. Marcus studied her face, the sharp cheekbones, the green eyes that held depths of pain no 20-year-old should carry. "I'll come back," he said. "That's a promise." The ride to Columbus felt longer this time. Every shadow potentially hiding enemies, every bird call a possible signal. But the town seemed normal when he arrived, lazy and dust-covered in the afternoon heat, with only a few horses tied outside the saloon. Marcus left Amos at the livery stable and walked casual-like toward the general store, ears tuned for any unusual talk. Mrs. Garrett greeted him with nervous politeness, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting trouble to follow him inside. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," she said. "Forgot coffee." Marcus lied, picking up a small bag from the shelf. As Mrs. Garrett counted his change, she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Marcus, I don't know what kind of trouble you and that girl are mixed up in, but there's been men asking questions. Professional men, if you catch my meaning." "What kind of questions?" "About strangers passing through. About a particular young woman with dark hair." Mrs. Garrett glanced toward the saloon. "One of them's in there now talking to folks. Claims to be a federal marshal, but..." She shrugged. "Marshal's badge can be bought same as anything else, I reckon." Marcus thanked her and stepped back into the street, his mind working. A false lawman meant Blackwood had resources connections. It also meant the man was smart enough to give his hunters a veneer of legitimacy. The saloon was dim and smoky, smelling of whiskey and unwashed bodies. A dozen men sat at various tables, nursing drinks and playing cards. At the bar stood a man who immediately drew Marcus's attention, tall and well-dressed with silver-gray hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of authority. The man wore a marshal's star on his vest, but everything else about him was wrong. His clothes were too fine for a federal lawman, his boots too expensive. When he turned to survey the room, Marcus saw eyes like chips of winter ice, calculating and cold. This had to be Victor Blackwood himself. Marcus ordered whiskey and found a table where he could listen without being obvious about it. Blackwood was holding court at the bar, regaling the locals with stories that painted him as a defender of law and order. "Terrible thing, the breakdown of civilization we've seen since the war," Blackwood was saying, his voice carrying the smooth authority of a practiced politician. "Men taking what doesn't belong to them. Women forgetting their proper place in society. Why, just last week I had to track down a young woman who'd been led astray by criminal elements." "What kind of criminal elements?" asked one of the locals. "The worst kind. Men who prey on the weak and vulnerable, who fill women's heads with dangerous ideas about freedom and independence." Blackwood's voice took on a tone of righteous indignation. This particular woman had been legally bound to work off her family's debts, but instead of honoring that obligation, she allowed herself to be seduced by promises of easy escape. Marcus felt his jaw clench. The way Blackwood told it, Izzy was nothing more than a runaway debtor who'd been corrupted by outside influences. "Folks around here seen this woman," Blackwood continued. "Dark hair, green eyes, about 20 years old. She'd be traveling with a man, probably someone who doesn't understand the legal complexities of the situation. Matter of fact, said the drunk who'd confronted them days earlier, his jaw still swollen from Marcus's punch. We did see someone matching that description, traveling with a fellow named Marcus Kane. Blackwood's attention sharpened like a hawk spotting prey. Marcus Kane, you say? Tell me about this man. As the drunk launched into a description of their encounter, Marcus studied Blackwood's face. He saw calculation there, and something else, a cold satisfaction that made his skin crawl. This Kane, Blackwood said thoughtfully, does he have property around here? Someplace he might take a fugitive to hide? Got a cabin somewhere up in the hills, offered another local. Keeps to himself mostly. War veteran, I think. Ah. Blackwood nodded as if this explained everything. Another poor soul damaged by the conflict. No doubt the war left many men with confused ideas about authority and proper order. He turned to address the room at large. Gentlemen, I am prepared to offer a substantial reward for information leading to the recovery of this stolen property. $50 for reliable intelligence, $200 for actual recovery. The numbers sent a ripple of excitement through the saloon. That kind of money could keep a man comfortable for months. Now I want to be clear. Blackwood continued, his voice taking on the measured tone of a judge. This isn't about vengeance or cruelty. This is about upholding the law, about maintaining the contracts and obligations that hold civilized society together. The woman in question owes a legal debt, and that debt must be paid. What happens to her when you find her? Asked someone from the back of the room. Blackwood's smile was thin as a knife blade. She'll be returned to her rightful place, of course. She'll complete her obligation as originally agreed. As for the man who aided her escape, he shrugged. Well, theft is theft regardless of the thief's intentions. Marcus had heard enough. He finished his whiskey and stood to leave, moving casual-like toward the door. But as he passed the bar, Blackwood's voice stopped him cold. You're new here. Marcus turned slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Passing through. Blackwood studied him with those ice-chip eyes, taking in his worn clothes, his careful posture, the way his hand rested near his gun. You have the look of a soldier about you. Which side did you serve? Union, Marcus said, seeing no point in lying. Ah, a fellow veteran. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then you understand the importance of duty, of following orders, even when they're unpleasant. The war taught us both that civilization requires structure, doesn't it? Rules that must be followed, debts that must be paid. Depends on the rules, Marcus said carefully. Some orders aren't worth following. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Blackwood's smile faded, replaced by something much more dangerous. An interesting philosophy, he said softly. Tell me, friend, what's your name? For a heartbeat, Marcus considered lying, but something in Blackwood's manner told him the man already knew the answer. Marcus Kane. A murmur ran through the saloon. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught a flicker of satisfaction in those cold eyes. Marcus Kane, Blackwood repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. The same Marcus Kane who was seen in this very town 3 days ago traveling with a young woman of particular interest to me. Don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Blackwood reached into his vest and pulled out a silver pocket watch, checking the time with elaborate casualness. It's interesting, Mr. Kane, how often good intentions lead men astray. I imagine you thought you were helping this woman, didn't you? Thought you were rescuing her from some terrible fate. Marcus said nothing, but his hand drifted closer to his gun. The truth is more complex, I'm afraid, Blackwood continued. The young woman you're harboring is legally bound property purchased and paid for according to proper contracts. By hiding her, you're committing theft. By refusing to return her, you're compounding that crime. Funny kind of law that lets men own women like livestock, Marcus said. The law is the law, regardless of our personal feelings about it. Blackwood's voice carried the patient tone of a teacher addressing a slow student. But I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Kane. Return what you've taken and we can forget this unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened. And if I don't, Blackwood's smile returned colder than before. Then I'm afraid I'll have to exercise my authority as a duly appointed peace officer. You see, theft of valuable property is a serious crime, punishable by imprisonment or worse. Around them, the saloon had gone dead quiet. Every man in the room was listening, waiting to see how this confrontation would play out. "That tin star on your chest," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "Where exactly did you get it?" "I am a legally appointed federal marshal, Mr. Kane, with full authority to enforce the law in this territory." "Which territory would that be?" For the first time, Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. "I think we're done here, Mr. Kane. You have 24 hours to consider my generous offer. After that—" He shrugged. "Well, after that, I'll be forced to take more direct action." Marcus backed toward the door, never taking his eyes off Blackwood. "You know where to find me." "Indeed I do." Blackwood turned back to the bar, dismissing him with studied casualness. "Indeed I do." As Marcus stepped into the afternoon sunlight, he heard Blackwood's voice resume behind him now, addressing the room in general. "Gentlemen, you've just witnessed the kind of lawlessness that threatens to tear our society apart. A man who places his personal feelings above legal obligation, who thinks himself above the contracts and debts that bind us all together." Marcus didn't wait to hear more. He retrieved Amos and rode hard toward home, his mind racing with everything he'd learned. Blackwood wasn't just a bounty hunter or a corrupt lawman. He was something worse, a man who'd found a way to make slavery legal again, who'd built a system of debt and bondage that trapped the desperate and vulnerable. And now that system had found them. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky the color of dried blood, Marcus knew their time of hiding was over. Blackwood would come, and when he did, it would be with the full weight of corrupted law behind him. The only question now was whether they'd be ready. Marcus found Izzy pacing the cabin like a caged animal, her face pale with worry. When she heard Amos approaching, she burst through the door, relief flooding her features. "What did you learn?" she asked, helping him with the saddle. "More than I wanted to." Marcus led the horse to the small corral behind the cabin. "Blackwood's in Columbus, claims to be a federal marshal, but that badge is as false as everything else about him." Izzy's hand stilled on the saddle blanket. "You saw him, talked to him." "He knows we're here, knows about the cabin." Marcus turned to face her, seeing his own grim certainty reflected in her eyes. "He's giving us 24 hours to surrender you voluntarily." "Then that's what we'll do." Izzy's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the terror lurking beneath her calm facade. "I won't have your death on my conscience." "Nobody's surrendering anybody." Marcus took the saddle blanket from her hands and hung it on the fence rail. "We knew this day would come. Now we figure out how to face it." They spent the evening preparing for war. Marcus cleaned his rifle and pistol, counted ammunition, checked the locks on doors and shutters. Izzy helped where she could, melting lead to cast bullets, preparing bandages from the blue cloth they'd bought in town. "How many men do you think he'll bring?" she asked as they worked by lamplight. "Hard to say. 3 or 4, maybe more. Depends on how much he wants you back." Marcus loaded shells into his rifle, the metallic clicks loud in the quiet cabin. "Question is whether they'll try to take you alive or just settle for making an example." Izzy was quiet for a long moment, her hands busy tearing cloth into strips. "At that place," she said finally, "when women tried to run and got caught, they'd bring them back to the yard and make all the others watch while they punished them." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They said it was to discourage rebellion, but I think Blackwood just enjoyed it. The power. The fear in everyone's eyes." Marcus felt cold rage settle in his chest. "He won't lay a hand on you again. That's a promise." "You can't promise that. You're just one man against however many he brings." "Maybe so. But I'm one man who's got something worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Izzy looked up from her work, meeting his eyes across the table. "Marcus," she began, but whatever she was going to say was cut off by the sound of horses approaching through the darkness. Both of them froze, listening. The hoofbeats were still distant, but growing closer, coming from the direction of the main trail. "Too early," Marcus muttered, blowing out the lamp and moving to the window. "Said 24 hours. It's only been 6. Through the darkness, he could make out 3 riders picking their way carefully up the rocky path to the cabin. They moved with the confidence of men who knew exactly where they were going. "Back room," Marcus whispered to Izzy. "Bar the door and don't come out no matter what you hear. I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "You are." if you want me to have a chance." He pressed his spare pistol into her hands. "If they get past me, use this. Don't let them take you alive." Izzy's fingers closed around the gun, and for a moment her mask of control slipped, showing the frightened girl beneath. "If you die, I won't." Marcus kissed her forehead, quick and gentle. "I won't." The riders had stopped just outside the circle of light from the cabin windows. Marcus could hear them talking in low voices, probably planning their approach. He positioned himself behind the overturned table rifle ready and waited. "Marcus Kane!" The voice that called out wasn't Blackwood's, but it carried the same arrogant authority. "We know you're in there. Come out and we can discuss this like civilized men." Marcus said nothing, watching the shadows beyond the windows. These weren't Blackwood's regular men. The voice was wrong, too young, too eager. Hired guns, most likely. Local boys looking to earn that $200 reward. "Kane, we're not here to hurt anybody, just want to talk." A lie, of course. If they'd wanted to talk, they would have come in daylight. Night raids were for killing and taking. One of the shadows moved closer to the front window, trying to peer inside. Marcus tracked him with the rifle finger on the trigger, waiting for the right moment. "Maybe he ain't here," said another voice. "Maybe they already run off." "Horse is still in the corral," replied the first speaker. "He's here all right. Probably got that runaway with him, too." "So what's the plan, Jake? We going in?" "Jake?" Marcus filed the name away as he watched the man creep closer to the door. Young voice, young movements, probably some local boy thinking to make his fortune hunting people. "Blackwood wants them alive if possible," Jake said. "But if they resist—" The rest was lost as the three men spread out around the cabin. Marcus heard footsteps on the roof, someone climbing up to try the chimney, or maybe just get a better view inside. Another set of boots moved around toward the back door. They were surrounding him, cutting off escape routes. The attack came without warning. A window exploded inward as someone threw a rock wrapped in burning cloth, followed immediately by another that set the curtains ablaze. At the same time, boots kicked at both the front and back doors. Marcus fired through the front door, heard a curse and a thud as someone fell. The back door held for a moment, then burst open to reveal a stocky man with a shotgun. Marcus rolled sideways as the shotgun boomed buckshot, splintering the wall where he'd been crouched. He came up firing his bullet, catching the shotgunner in the shoulder and spinning him around. The man stumbled backward but didn't go down, still trying to reload his weapon. From the roof came the sound of someone dropping down the chimney, followed by cursing as they hit the banked coals in the fireplace. Smoke and the smell of burning hair filled the cabin. Marcus scrambled toward the bedroom door, desperate to put himself between the attackers and Izzy. As he moved, Jake appeared in the broken window, pistol in hand. "There he is." The shot took Marcus in the side, spinning him around and slamming him against the cabin wall. Pain flared white-hot through his ribs, but he managed to get off a return shot that sent Jake diving for cover. More gunfire erupted as the man from the chimney emerged from the fireplace, clothes smoldering, face black with soot. He had a rifle and was looking for targets in the smoke-filled cabin. Marcus tried to reach his fallen weapon, but another bullet clipped his shoulder, sending him sprawling. Blood ran hot down his arm, and his vision wavered as shock tried to claim him. The shooting stopped suddenly, leaving only the crackle of flames and the ringing in Marcus's ears. Through the smoke, he saw Jake standing over him, pistol trained on his chest. Well, Jake said, breathing hard. "The famous Marcus Kane. Doesn't look like much now, does he, boys?" The other two attackers appeared through the haze, the shotgunner holding his wounded shoulder and the soot-covered man from the fireplace. All three looked worse for wear, but they were standing while Marcus lay bleeding on the floor. "Where's the girl?" Jake demanded. Marcus said nothing, conserving his strength. The bedroom door was still closed, still barred from inside. Maybe Izzy would have the sense to slip out the window and run. "I asked you a question." Jake's boot connected with Marcus's wounded side, sending fresh waves of agony through his body. "Go to hell," Marcus gasped. Jake laughed. Tough talk from a man who's bleeding out on his own floor. He gestured to his companions. "Search the place. She's got to be here somewhere." As the two men moved toward the bedroom, Marcus heard the bar being lifted from inside the door. "No," he thought desperately. "Stay hidden. Run." But the door opened and Izzy stepped out, the pistol held steady in both hands. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. Jake turned toward her, grinning. There she is, the famous runaway. You've led us quite a chase, darling. I said leave him alone. Izzy kept the gun trained on Jake's chest. You want me? Here I am. Take me and go. Oh, we'll take you all right, but first we got to deal with your friend here. Can't have word getting around that folks can steal from Mr. Blackwood and live to tell about it. Marcus tried to push himself up, tried to reach for a weapon, anything to help her, but his strength was flowing out with his blood leaving him weak as a newborn. Please, Izzy said, and now her composure was cracking. He was just trying to help me. This isn't his fight. Sure it is, Jake said. Became his fight the moment he decided to steal Blackwood's property. He raised his pistol toward Marcus's head. Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll make it quick. The shot that followed wasn't from Jake's gun. Izzy's bullet took him high in the chest, the impact lifting him off his feet and slamming him backward into the cabin wall. He hit hard and slid down, leaving a dark smear on the wood. For a moment, the cabin was absolutely silent. Then the other two men erupted into motion, the shotgunner trying to bring his weapon to bear, while the soot-covered man fumbled for his rifle. Izzy fired again, missed, and dove sideways as buckshot chewed splinters from the doorframe where she'd been standing. Marcus summoned the last of his strength and lunged for Jake's fallen pistol, managing to get his hands on it, just as the rifleman took aim at Izzy. Marcus's shot caught the man's center mass, dropping him instantly. The shotgunner, seeing both his partners down, broke for the door. Izzy let him go running instead to where Marcus lay, gasping against the wall. How bad? She asked, her hands already working to examine his wounds. Bad enough, Marcus admitted. The world was going gray around the edges, and he could taste blood in his mouth. But I'll live. Question is, what do we do now? Outside, they could hear the survivor riding hard toward town, no doubt carrying word of the failed raid to Blackwood. Soon, there would be more men better prepared and twice as angry. We run, Izzy said, helping him to his feet. We patch you up and we run as far and as fast as we can. Marcus leaned heavily on her, fighting waves of dizziness. Can't run forever. Then we run until we can't run anymore. Izzy's voice was fierce with determination. But we don't give up. We don't let them win. As she helped him toward the door, stepping over the bodies of the men who'd come to kill them, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since the war, a kind of grim pride in having faced impossible odds and survived. They'd won this battle. But the war was far from over. Blackwood would come himself next time, and he'd bring enough men to finish the job properly. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight they were alive, they were together, and they were free. For now, that was enough. They didn't make it far. Marcus lasted maybe 2 miles before the blood loss and shock caught up with him. He slumped forward in the saddle, and only Izzy's quick reflexes kept him from tumbling to the ground. She managed to guide Amos to a sheltered spot among the live oaks, where a spring bubbled up from limestone rocks. Can't go much further, Marcus mumbled, his face gray as old ashes. Izzy helped him down from the horse, her heart hammering as she felt how much blood had soaked through the makeshift bandages. The bullet wound in his side had reopened during the ride, and his shoulder was still seeping steadily. We have to keep moving, she said, though she could see he was in no condition to travel. That man who got away, he'll bring Blackwood and more guns. I know. Marcus leaned heavily against a tree trunk, breathing hard. But I'm no good to you like this. Leave me here. Take the horse and ride hard for Mexico. You can make it if you go now. No. The word came out sharp as a whip crack. Izzy, be reasonable. You got a chance if you go alone. They want you alive, which means they won't shoot to kill. But me. He coughed, and flecks of blood appeared on his lips. I'm just an obstacle to them now. Izzy knelt beside the spring and soaked a piece of cloth in the cold water, using it to clean the worst of the blood from his wounds. Maybe I'm tired of running, she said. Maybe I'm tired of letting other people decide what happens to me. This isn't the time for heroics. Isn't it? She met his eyes, and he saw something there he'd never seen before, not just courage, but a kind of fierce determination. You said once that I was stronger than what they did to me. Maybe it's time I proved that. Before Marcus could respond, they heard the sound of horses moving through the trees, still distant but getting closer. Too many horses for it to be the lone survivor returning with a few friends. They're here, Izzy whispered. Through the pre-dawn darkness, they could see torches moving between the trees like angry fireflies. Marcus counted at least 6 distinct lights, which meant Blackwood had brought serious force this time. "Listen to me," Marcus said, gripping Izzy's hand with what strength he had left. "They'll want to take you alive, but they'll try to use me to control you. Don't let them. Whatever they threaten to do to me, don't give in. Marcus, promise me." His grip tightened. "If you surrender because of me, then everything we've done, everything we fought for, it's all been for nothing." The torches were closer now, and they could hear voices calling back and forth as the searchers spread out through the forest. It wouldn't be long before someone spotted their hiding place. "I promise," Izzy said, though the words tasted like poison. They didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, torchlight flickered through the trees around their small clearing, and armed men emerged from the shadows like wolves closing in on wounded prey. Victor Blackwood stepped into the circle of light, impeccably dressed despite the early hour and rough terrain. Behind him came 5 men with guns drawn. Not local bounty hunters this time, but professionals with the hard faces of career killers. "Mr. Kane," Blackwood said with mock politeness, taking in Marcus's condition with satisfaction. "You look unwell. Perhaps you should have accepted my generous offer when you had the chance." Marcus tried to stand but only managed to get to his knees before weakness overwhelmed him. 2 of Blackwood's men immediately trained their rifles on him. "And Miss Reeves?" Blackwood's cold gaze shifted to Izzy. "How good to see you again, though I must say you've caused me considerable inconvenience." Izzy rose slowly, her hand moving toward the pistol tucked into her belt. Now. Blackwood raised a hand in a gesture of false calm. "There's no need for dramatics. You know why I'm here. You know what I want." "I'm not going back to that place." "My dear girl, you never left. Oh, you may have absconded with your physical person, but legally speaking, you remain my property until your debt is satisfied." Blackwood's tone was that of a patient teacher explaining simple arithmetic. "The sooner you accept that reality, the easier this will be for everyone." "She's not property," Marcus managed to say, though speaking sent fresh pain shooting through his chest. "People aren't property." Blackwood's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Spoken like a true idealist. Tell me, Mr. Kane, what do you call it when someone owes money they cannot pay, when they've consumed goods and services without compensation? In the civilized world, we call that debt, and debt must be repaid. By marking women like cattle," Izzy's voice shook with barely controlled rage, "by keeping them locked up like animals. By any means necessary to ensure compliance with lawful contracts." Blackwood stepped closer, his men spreading out to cut off any escape routes. "You signed papers, Miss Reeves. You agreed to work off your family's obligations. The fact that you found the arrangement unpleasant doesn't invalidate your legal commitment." "I never signed anything." "Your mother did. Before she died, she signed over your services to cover the medical expenses and funeral costs." Blackwood reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "All perfectly legal and properly witnessed." Izzy stared at the papers in his hand, her face going white. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Your mother was dying, Miss Reeves. The doctor's bills were mounting, and your family had no way to pay. I offered a solution immediate payment of all expenses in exchange for your service until the debt was cleared." Blackwood's smile was thin and cold. "She was grateful for my generosity. She would do anything to ensure her daughter had a chance at life, even if that life involved unpleasant obligations." Blackwood folded the papers and returned them to his coat. "Maternal love is such a powerful force, don't you think?" Marcus watched Izzy's face crumble as the implications hit her. Everything she'd believed about her escape, about her right to freedom, was being twisted into something ugly and legal and binding. "Even if that's true," Marcus said, forcing the words out through gritted teeth, "debt doesn't justify what you did to her, what you did to all those women. I provided food, shelter, and purpose to women who would otherwise have starved on the streets." Blackwood's tone remained maddeningly reasonable. "If the work was demanding, well, life itself is demanding. At least they were guaranteed survival. You branded her like livestock. I marked my property to prevent theft as any reasonable businessman would do. Blackwood's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. Speaking of which, you've committed a serious crime, Mr. Kane. Theft of valuable property, harboring a fugitive conspiracy to defraud. These are hanging offenses in some jurisdictions. One of Blackwood's men stepped forward, pressing the barrel of his rifle against Marcus's forehead. Want me to save the territory the cost of a trial, boss? Not yet, Samuel. Our Miss Reeves needs to understand the consequences of continued resistance. Blackwood looked directly at Izzy. You see, my dear, every moment you remain in unlawful freedom adds to your debt. Interest compounds daily. And now, thanks to your adventures, you're also responsible for the cost of tracking you down the expenses of this expedition and compensation for the men Mr. Kane killed. How much? Izzy asked quietly. I'd estimate your current obligation at approximately $3,000, at the standard rate of debt reduction that represents, roughly 15 years of service. The number hit like a physical blow. 15 years. By the time she'd worked off the debt, she'd be past 35, used up and broken. Of course, Blackwood continued, I'm prepared to be reasonable. Return voluntarily. Now accept your obligations without further resistance, and I'll reduce the penalty to a mere 10 years. Refuse. He gestured to his men. Well, Mr. Kane's continued existence becomes quite precarious. Izzy looked at Marcus, seeing the blood seeping through his bandages, the gray pallor of his skin. He was dying already, she realized. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the wounds were too severe for him to survive without proper medical care. What guarantee do I have? She asked. I beg your pardon. If I come with you, what guarantee do I have that you won't kill him anyway? Blackwood considered this with the air of a man weighing a business proposition. You have my word as a gentleman. Your word isn't worth the paper it's written on. Perhaps not, but it's the only currency I'm prepared to offer. Blackwood pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. You have 1 minute to decide, Miss Reeves. After that, I'll assume you prefer to watch Mr. Kane die slowly, rather than accept your lawful obligations. The clearing fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing and the distant call of a mockingbird greeting the dawn. Izzy looked around at the armed men, at Blackwood's cold, satisfied face, at Marcus bleeding his life away onto the forest floor. 15 years. Or 10 if she surrendered now. 10 years of degradation and abuse, of being treated like property, of having her humanity stripped away piece by piece. But Marcus would live. Maybe. If Blackwood kept his word. Time's up, Blackwood announced. Samuel, if you would. Wait. Izzy's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. I'll come with you. No, Marcus whispered, trying to reach for her. Izzy, don't. I'll come with you, she repeated louder this time. But first I want to say goodbye. Blackwood nodded graciously. Of course. A moment of sentiment is perfectly understandable. Izzy knelt beside Marcus, her hand finding his. To anyone watching, it would look like a tender farewell between lovers. But as she leaned close, her lips near his ear, she whispered something that made his eyes go wide. When I move, she breathed, be ready. Before he could respond, she was standing again, her hand resting on the butt of the pistol at her belt. She looked directly at Blackwood, her green eyes blazing with something between rage and resolution. You want your property back, she said. Come and take it. The gun appeared in Izzy's hand like magic, the barrel swinging toward Blackwood's chest. For a split second, everyone in the clearing froze, caught between surprise and training. Then Isabella Reeves, the woman they'd marked as property, the girl they'd tried to break and own and use up, squeezed the trigger. The bullet took Victor Blackwood high in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees among the spring wildflowers. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the clearing erupted into chaos as his men scrambled for cover, unsure whether to shoot the woman they'd been ordered to take alive. That moment of hesitation was all Marcus needed. Despite his wounds, he rolled behind the limestone outcropping and came up with his pistol, putting 2 quick shots into the nearest gunman before the others could react. Izzy dove sideways as bullets whined past her head, using the confusion to take cover behind a massive oak tree. She could hear Blackwood cursing and gasping, still alive but badly hurt. Take her alive, he shouted to his men, blood frothing on his lips. I want her alive. But his authority was bleeding away with his life, and his hired guns were more concerned with staying breathing than following orders. They spread out through the trees, using the pre-dawn darkness to their advantage as they tried to flank the two defenders. Marcus counted muzzle flashes. 4 men still standing, maybe 5. Too many for a wounded man and a woman with limited ammunition, but they had the advantage of desperation, and sometimes that was enough. Samuel and Blackwood's voice was weaker now, strained with pain. Samuel, finish this. A tall man with a scarred face emerged from behind a cedar tree, rifle raised. This was Samuel Blackwood's lieutenant, and unlike the others, he moved with the confidence of a professional killer. "Come on out, girl," Samuel called. "Boss wants to talk to you." "I've heard enough of his talk," Izzy replied, checking her remaining ammunition. 3 bullets left in the cylinder. "You killed a federal marshal. That's a hanging offense even for a woman." "He wasn't a marshal," Izzy shot back. "Just a man with a false badge and a black heart." Samuel laughed, the sound harsh in the morning air. "Law is whatever the man with the most guns says it is, and right now that's us." A shot rang out from their left flank, the bullet splintering bark inches from Izzy's head. Another gunman was trying to work his way around behind them. She fired back, heard a curse, but couldn't tell if she'd hit anything vital. Marcus was fading fast. She could see him slumped against the rocks, his breathing shallow and irregular. Blood had soaked through all his bandages, and his face was the color of old parchment. "Marcus," she whispered, "stay with me." His eyes flickered open, unfocused but determined. "How many left?" "Too many." He managed a weak smile. "Then we better make our shots count." Another bullet cracked past them, this one from their right. They were being surrounded, systematically pushed back toward the spring, where there would be no cover at all. "This is your last chance, girl," Samuel shouted. "Come out now and maybe we'll make your friend's death quick." Izzy looked at Marcus, saw him trying to raise his pistol with trembling hands. He was done, finished running on nothing but stubborn will. In minutes, maybe seconds, they'd be overrun. But then she heard something that made her heart leap, the sound of horses approaching fast through the forest. Not the careful advance of hunters, but the thundering charge of riders in a hurry. "What the hell?" Samuel's voice was cut off by the crack of rifle fire, but not from his men. These shots came from the forest beyond, and they were aimed at Blackwood's gunmen. Through the trees came 6 riders, their faces grim and determined. At their head rode a man Izzy recognized from Columbus, Thomas Whitmore, the rancher who'd seemed sympathetic to Blackwood's cause. But these men weren't riding to help the false marshal. They were riding to end him. "That's far enough, Blackwood," Whitmore shouted as his men spread out surrounding the clearing. "This stops now." Blackwood, still on his knees and bleeding heavily, looked up in confusion. "Whitmore, what are you doing here?" "Cleaning up a mistake," Whitmore replied, dismounting with his rifle ready. "Should have done this when you first came to town with your lies and false papers." "I don't understand. You thought we were stupid enough to believe your story about legal debt and proper contracts." Whitmore spat in the dirt. "We may be country folk, Blackwood, but we're not blind. Word came through from Austin yesterday. You're wanted for trafficking fraud and about a dozen other crimes. That marshal's badge is as fake as everything else about you." Samuel, seeing the odds shift dramatically against them, made a desperate play. He swung his rifle toward Izzy, but Whitmore was faster. The rancher's shot took Samuel's center mass, dropping him before he could squeeze the trigger. The remaining gunmen, seeing their leader down and surrounded by hostile forces, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. The fight was over as suddenly as it had begun. Whitmore walked over to where Blackwood knelt bleeding among the wildflowers. The false marshal's face was gray with shock and blood loss, but his eyes still burned with malicious fury. "You have no idea what you're doing," Blackwood gasped. "I have powerful friends, important connections. This won't end here." "Maybe not," Whitmore said calmly, "but your part in it will." He looked over at Izzy and Marcus, taking in their condition with a practiced eye. "Ma'am, your man needs a doctor bad. My boy Jacob's got medical training from the war. He can patch him up enough for the ride to town." Izzy nodded gratefully, too overwhelmed to speak. One of Whitmore's men, a young fellow with gentle hands, was already kneeling beside Marcus with a medical kit. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why did you help us?" Whitmore removed his hat and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Because we heard what really happened at that place Blackwood was running. Heard about the women he kept there, what he did to them. His voice hardened. My own sister got caught up in something similar in Louisiana after the war. Took us 2 years to find her, and when we did, he shook his head. Some lines you don't cross. Not if you want to call yourself a man. As Jacob worked on Marcus's wounds, cleaning and rebandaging them with proper supplies, Whitmore knelt beside Blackwood. The false marshal was still alive, but barely. Those papers you showed us, Whitmore said. The ones claiming this girl owed you money. Where are they? Blackwood's hand moved weakly toward his coat pocket. Whitmore reached in and pulled out the folded documents, examining them in the growing daylight. Forgeries, he announced after a moment. Pretty good ones, but forgeries all the same. The signatures don't match the courthouse records. The witnesses listed one's been dead 3 years, the other never existed. He looked at Izzy. You're free, miss. Legally and properly free. Always have been. The words hit Izzy like a physical blow. Free. After all the running, all the fear, all the nights wondering if she'd ever truly escape, she was finally actually free. Blackwood tried to speak, blood frothing on his lips. You don't understand. There are others, more places. My associates. Then we'll find them too, Whitmore said grimly. And we'll shut them down one by one. Texas Rangers are already moving on 3 other compounds based on the information we gathered. Your whole operation is finished, Blackwood. By the time Jacob finished with Marcus, the sun was fully up, painting the clearing in golden light. The wounded man was conscious and coherent, though still weak from blood loss. Will he live? Izzy asked. If we get him to town and keep those wounds clean, Jacob replied. He's tough as old leather, I'll give him that. Lost a lot of blood, but the bullets missed anything vital. Lucky man. They made a stretcher from blankets and tree branches, carefully loading Marcus for the journey back to Columbus. As they prepared to leave, Whitmore approached Izzy with something in his hand. Found this in Blackwood's saddlebags, he said, holding out a small leather pouch. Gold coins and paper money, a lot of it. Figure it's compensation for what you've been through. Izzy stared at the pouch, then at Blackwood's still form lying among the flowers. The man who'd claimed to own her, who'd marked her like livestock, who'd tried to steal her very humanity. He was finished. Dead or dying, it didn't matter. His power over her was broken forever. There's more, Whitmore continued. Found a ledger in his other bag, names and locations of all the women he had papers on. We'll make sure every one of them knows they're free. How many? Izzy asked quietly. 43 in Texas alone, more in Louisiana and Arkansas. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Every one of them branded like you were. Every one of them told they were legally bound property. Marcus stirred on the stretcher, his voice weak but clear. What about the men who helped him, the ones who knew what was happening and did nothing? Some are in custody already. Others will be soon. Whitmore looked back at Blackwood's body. This kind of evil doesn't grow in isolation. Takes a lot of people looking the other way. Time for folks to face what they've allowed. The journey back to Columbus took most of the morning with frequent stops to check on Marcus and adjust his bandages. By the time they reached town, word had already spread about the confrontation in the forest. People lined the main street watching in silence as the procession passed. Mrs. Garrett from the general store stepped forward as they stopped in front of the doctor's office. Is there anything I can do to help? She asked, her voice full of genuine concern. Some of that blue cloth, Izzy said. I think I'd like to make myself a proper dress after all. The older woman smiled, tears in her eyes. I'll have it ready for you, dear. No charge. And anything else you need, you just ask. As Whitmore's men carried Marcus into the doctor's office, Izzy paused at the threshold. Behind her lay everything she'd run from: the fear, the shame, the sense of being marked and owned. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. She looked down at her hands, still stained with gunpowder from the shot that had ended Blackwood's reign of terror. These were the hands that had killed a man that had chosen violence to preserve freedom. She should have felt guilty, maybe, or ashamed. Instead, she felt strong. For the first time since they'd branded her thigh with that terrible word, Isabella Reeves felt like she truly owned herself, and that she thought as she followed Marcus into the doctor's office was worth whatever came next. The doctor, an elderly man named Harrison, with steady hands and kind eyes, worked on Marcus for 3 hours. Izzy refused to leave the room holding Marcus's hand while the doctor cleaned and stitched his wounds. "The shoulder wound is clean," Dr. Harrison said as he worked. "The one in his side is more concerning. A lot of tissue damage, but no organs hit. He's lucky another inch to the left, and we'd be having a different conversation." "Will he recover fully?" Izzy asked. "With time and proper care, yes. But he'll need to stay still for at least 2 weeks. No riding, no exertion. The wounds need time to knit properly." Marcus, groggy from the laudanum the doctor had given him for pain, squeezed Izzy's hand. "Hear that? You're stuck with me for 2 weeks at least." "I can think of worse fates," she said, trying to keep her voice light, despite the tears threatening to fall. Whitmore had arranged for them to stay in the boarding house next to the doctor's office. The proprietress, Mrs. Walsh, was a widow who'd lost her husband in the war and had no patience for men like Blackwood. "You'll have the best room," she said, leading Izzy upstairs while the men carried Marcus. "Overlooks the garden, quiet and peaceful. And don't you worry about payment, Mr. Whitmore's taken care of everything." The room was simple but clean, with white curtains and a quilt covered in embroidered roses. They settled Marcus into the bed, and for the first time in days, Izzy saw him truly relax. "Rest now," she said, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I'll be right here." "Izzy," he said, fighting to stay awake. "What you did back there, shooting Blackwood, that took courage." "It took desperation," she corrected. "I couldn't let him hurt you, couldn't go back to that place." Still, his eyes were drifting closed. "You saved us both." As Marcus slept, Izzy sat by the window watching the town go about its business. It seemed impossible that life could just continue as normal after everything that had happened. But perhaps that was the point. Life did continue regardless of individual tragedies and triumphs. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Garrett entered with an armload of fabric and sewing supplies. "Thought you might want to get started on that dress," she said, setting everything on the small table. "Also brought you something else." She pulled out a small mirror, polished and new. "Figured you might want to see yourself properly, see who you really are." After Mrs. Garrett left, Izzy stood before the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at her was thin, marked by hardship, with eyes that had seen too much. But she was also strong, alive, free. She touched the mirror's surface, thinking of all the other women still trapped in places like Blackwood's compound. Whitmore had said they'd all be freed, but freedom was more than just walking away. It was learning to live without fear, to make choices to believe you deserved better. Over the next days, as Marcus recovered, Izzy worked on her dress. The blue fabric transformed under her hands into something simple but beautiful. Mrs. Walsh and Mrs. Garrett stopped by regularly, bringing food and companionship. Other women from the town came, too drawn by curiosity at first, then by something deeper, a recognition of shared struggle, even if the specifics differed. "My husband used to hit me," one woman confided. "Not the same as what you went through, but I understand feeling owned." "After the war, I had nothing," another said. "Took work in a saloon. The things men think they can do to you when you're desperate." She trailed off, but Izzy understood. These women formed an informal circle around her and Marcus a protection of sorts. When a newspaper reporter from Austin came to town wanting to write about the branded woman, they closed ranks, refusing to let him near the boarding house. "She's been through enough," Mrs. Walsh told him firmly. "Leave her be." But Izzy surprised them all by agreeing to speak with the reporter on her own terms. "People need to know," she told Marcus, who was finally able to sit up in bed. "Not for sensation, but for truth. How many other women are trapped because everyone pretends it isn't happening?" The reporter, a young man named Timothy Carroll, was respectful and thorough. Izzy told him everything: the forged papers, the brandings, the compound that was part prison, part brothel, all hidden behind a veneer of legal debt collection. "Will you show me the brand?" Carroll asked carefully. Izzy was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, lifting her skirt just enough to reveal the word burned into her thigh. Carroll's face went pale. They did this to all of them. Every woman there. Some had it worse, multiple brandings for multiple infractions. One woman had her entire back covered in scars. Carroll's article would eventually run in newspapers across Texas and beyond, sparking outrage and legislative action. But that was still to come. For now, there was just the quiet room, Marcus's steady breathing, and the slow work of healing. One evening, as the sun set over Columbus, Marcus was finally able to stand and walk to the window. He stood behind Izzy, his arms wrapped around her, both of them, looking out at the world. "What will we do?" she asked. "When you're healed, where will we go?" "Wherever you want," he said. "The cabin's still there if you want quiet. Or we could go somewhere new, California maybe. Start fresh where nobody knows our story." "Our story," she repeated, leaning back against him. "I like the sound of that." "Izzy," his voice was serious. "That brand, it'll always be there. I can't magic it away." She turned in his arms to face him. "I know. But it doesn't define me. Not anymore. It's just a scar now, a reminder of what I survived. You're the strongest person I know. I'm not," she said. "I'm just someone who got lucky. Lucky to escape. Lucky to find you. Lucky that Whitmore and the others came when they did. That wasn't luck. That was you refusing to give up. That was you choosing to fight." A week later, Marcus was strong enough to walk around town. They visited the cemetery where Blackwood and his men had been buried in unmarked graves. Izzy stood looking at the fresh-turned earth for a long time. "I should feel something," she said. "Guilt, maybe. Or satisfaction. But I just feel empty." "He was a man who chose to do evil," Marcus said. "You stopped him. That's all there is to it." "Is it? What about all the people who knew and did nothing? The lawyers who drew up those papers, the judges who enforced them, the men who visited the compound?" She shook her head. "Blackwood's dead, but the system that created him isn't." She was right, of course. Even as they stood there, debates raged in the state legislature about debt laws and women's rights. Some wanted reform. Others argued that changing the laws would undermine the entire economic system. But change was coming slowly and inevitably. The Texas Rangers had indeed raided 3 other compounds, freeing over 100 women. More raids were planned. The scandal was too big to ignore now. That evening, Whitmore came to the boarding house with news. "Got a telegram from Austin," he said. "The governor's offering a reward for information leading to more of these places. And there's talk of a new law specifically outlawing debt bondage." "Talk is cheap," Izzy said. "Maybe, but it's a start." Whitmore pulled out an envelope. "Also got this. It's for you." Inside was a letter from a woman named Sarah Mills, one of the others who'd been held at Blackwood's compound. "Dear Isabella," it read, "I heard what you did, what you risked. Because of you, I'm free. We all are. I'm writing this from my sister's house in Houston, where I'm safe and starting to remember who I was before. Thank you. Thank you for being brave when the rest of us couldn't be. Thank you for shooting that monster. Thank you for showing us that we weren't property, no matter what they burned into our skin. If you ever need anything, ever you have 42 sisters who will come running. With love and gratitude, Sarah." Izzy read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. "You did that," Marcus said softly. "You gave them hope." "We did it," she corrected. "You believed I was worth saving when I didn't believe it myself." 2 weeks after the shooting, Dr. Harrison declared Marcus fit to travel, though he warned against anything strenuous. They decided to return to the cabin at least for a while to figure out their next steps. The morning they left Columbus, half the town turned out to see them off. Mrs. Walsh packed them enough food for a week. Mrs. Garrett gave Izzy several lengths of fabric for whatever you might need. Even the blacksmith who'd been ready to turn Izzy in for bounty money approached with an apology. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Man lets money cloud his judgment sometimes. I'm sorry." Whitmore rode with them partway, his son Jacob and 3 other men accompanying them for protection. "There might still be some of Blackwood's associates out there," Whitmore explained. "Want to make sure you get home safe." As they rode through the Texas hill country, past fields of wildflowers and through stands of oak and cedar, Izzy felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten it existed: peace. Not the absence of fear exactly. That might never fully go away, but a quieting of the constant terror that had lived in her chest for so long. A sense that maybe possibly the worst was behind her. When they reached the cabin, they found it much as they'd left it, minus the bloodstains and broken windows. Someone Whitmore's men probably had cleaned up the bodies and repaired the damage. "Home," Marcus said, dismounting carefully, still favoring his wounded side. "Home," Izzy agreed, though the word felt strange in her mouth. She'd had homes before the farm with her parents, the rented room in Fort Worth, even the compound in its own twisted way. But this was different. This was chosen. That night, as they sat by the fire, Marcus pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "Made this while I was recovering," he said, unwrapping it to reveal a small wooden box carved with delicate flowers. "It's not much, but I thought you might want somewhere safe to keep things. Letters, memories, whatever you want." Inside the box was a single item, a silver ring, simple and unadorned. "Marcus," she breathed. "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you've been through hell, and the last thing you need is another man trying to claim you. But I wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to spend my life with you. Not as owner or master or any of that. As partners. Equals." Izzy took the ring, holding it up to the firelight. It was nothing fancy, probably cost him most of the money he had, but it was perfect. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," she said honestly. "The idea of belonging to anyone, even symbolically." "Then don't wear it," Marcus said. "Keep it in the box. Or throw it in the creek. Whatever feels right. I just wanted you to know how I feel." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she slipped the ring onto her right hand, not the wedding finger, but close enough. "Partners," she said. The weeks following their return to the cabin passed in a strange rhythm of healing and adjustment. Marcus grew stronger each day, though his shoulders still ached when storms rolled through the hill country. Izzy threw herself into making the cabin truly theirs, sewing curtains from Mrs. Garrett's fabric, planning a larger garden, transforming the space from a bachelor's retreat into something that felt like home. But the outside world wouldn't leave them alone. The first visitor came on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Blackwood's death. Izzy was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching a well-dressed man on an expensive horse picking his way carefully up the trail. "Marcus Chirpus," she called, and he emerged from the cabin with his rifle, though he kept it pointed down. The rider stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat. "Mr. Kane, Miss Reeves." "My name is Jonathan Hartley. I'm a prosecutor with the state attorney's office in Austin." "If you're here to arrest her for Blackwood's death," Marcus began. "On the contrary," Hartley said quickly. "I'm here because we need Miss Reeves's testimony. We're bringing charges against 17 men connected to Blackwood's operation. Fraud, trafficking, false imprisonment, assault. But without witness testimony, most of them will walk free." Izzy stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "You want me to testify in court?" "I know it's asking a lot," Hartley said. "You'd have to relive terrible experiences, face men who participated in your abuse. But your testimony could ensure that this never happens to another woman in Texas." "When?" Marcus asked. "The trial starts in 6 weeks, in Austin. The state will cover all expenses, provide protection, and ensure safe lodging." Izzy was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the hills. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. I'll be in Columbus for 3 days. Send word to the boarding house when you decide." After Hartley left, Marcus found Izzy sitting by the creek, her feet in the water, staring at nothing. "You don't have to do it," he said, settling beside her. "Don't I? How many women are still trapped because people like me stay quiet?" "You've done enough. You killed Blackwood. You survived. Nobody could ask for more." "I could." She picked up a smooth stone and threw it into the water. "I could ask myself to be brave one more time." That night, she made her decision. The next morning, Marcus rode to Columbus to tell Hartley she would testify. Word of her decision spread quickly. Within days, other women began arriving at the cabin. Not all at once, but in ones and twos, usually accompanied by family members or friends. Women who'd been held at Blackwood's compound. Women who'd escaped from similar places. Women who'd survived their own versions of hell. Sarah Mills was the one who'd written the letter. She was older than Izzy, maybe 30, with prematurely gray streaks in her brown hair and eyes that never quite met anyone's gaze. "I wanted to thank you in person," she said, standing awkwardly in the dooryard. "And to tell you that if you're testifying, I will too." "Sarah, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. We all do. Otherwise, they win, even though they're dead or in jail. By the end of the week, 12 women had agreed to testify. They met at the cabin, sitting in a circle under the oak trees, sharing their stories in preparation for the trial. It was hard, brutal work. Many tears were shed. Several times women had to step away, overwhelmed by memories. But something else happened too. In sharing their pain, they found strength. In speaking their truth, they reclaimed parts of themselves they'd thought lost forever. "They branded me 3 times," a woman named Catherine said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Once for trying to escape, once for refusing a customer, once just because Blackwood was drunk and angry. They made us fight each other for food," another woman, Maria added, said it would teach us our place. "The worst part," Sarah said quietly, "was how they made it all seem legal, like we deserved it, like we'd brought it on ourselves by being poor or desperate or alone." Marcus listened from the porch, giving the women space but staying close enough to help if needed. He'd seen men break from war trauma, but this was different. These women had been broken systematically, deliberately, with calculated cruelty. That any of them could still stand, still speak, still fight, it was a kind of courage he'd rarely witnessed. Thomas Whitmore visited a week before the trial, bringing troubling news. "There have been threats," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Izzy. "Anonymous letters to the prosecutor. Men saying they'll burn down the courthouse if the trial proceeds. Others offering bribes to make the whole thing go away." "They're scared," Marcus said. "Good. Maybe. But scared men do desperate things. I'm arranging protection for the journey to Austin. Armed guards, multiple routes, the works." "That necessary?" Izzy asked. Blackwood had partners, silent investors who profited from his operation, men who used the compound's services. They have a lot to lose if this comes to light. Whitmore's expression was grim. Some of them are powerful, judges, legislators, businessmen. This trial could bring down half the power structure in East Texas. "Then it needs to happen," Izzy said firmly. The night before they left for Austin, Marcus found Izzy standing in front of the mirror in their bedroom, fully dressed despite the late hour. She was holding the blue dress she'd made, running her fingers over the fabric. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Keep thinking about facing them. The men who came to the compound. The ones who chose which woman they wanted for the night. The ones who watched Blackwood brand us like we were entertainment." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "What if I can't do it? What if I freeze?" Marcus stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Then you freeze, and then you unfreeze, and you speak anyway. Because you're Isabella Reeves, and you've already done the impossible." "I'm scared." "Good. Means you understand what you're up against, but fear's just information. Tells you something's important. Doesn't mean you have to let it stop you." She turned in his arms, burying her face against his chest. "Will you be there in the courtroom? Try to keep me away." The journey to Austin took 3 days, their group traveling in a convoy of wagons and armed riders. The 12 women who'd agreed to testify rode together in 2 covered wagons, finding comfort in shared company. Marcus rode alongside, rifle across his saddle, scanning the horizon for trouble. They stopped the first night in Bastrop, where Whitmore had arranged rooms at a hotel. The proprietor, learning who his guests were, initially refused to house them. "I don't want that kind of trouble," he said. "Those women are stirring up things better left alone." It was Mrs. Walsh who'd traveled with them to provide support, who changed his mind. "These women are trying to see justice done. If you turn them away, everyone will know you stood with the criminals instead of the victims." The proprietor relented, though he clearly wasn't happy about it. That night, someone threw rocks through the hotel windows. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Not everyone wanted this trial to proceed. Austin was bigger than Izzy had imagined, the state capital bustling with commerce and politics. The courthouse stood in the center of town, an imposing limestone building that seemed to judge everyone who approached it. Hartley had arranged accommodations at a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Chen, whose husband had been killed in the war, and who had no patience for men who abused women. "You're safe here," she told them. "My sons and their friends will be watching the house day and night. Anyone tries anything, they'll regret it." The trial was set to begin in 2 days. Hartley spent those days preparing the women, going over their testimony, warning them about the defense attorney's tactics. "They'll try to make you seem like willing participants," he said. "They'll question your character, your choices, your past. It will be brutal. But remember, you're not on trial. They are." The night before the trial, all 12 women gathered in Mrs. Chen's parlor. Some prayed, some cried. Some sat in stoic silence. Sarah raised a glass of water. "To us," she said, "to surviving, to speaking, to ending this. To Isabella," Catherine added, looking at Izzy, "for showing us we could fight back. To all of us, Izzy corrected, for refusing to disappear." The courthouse was packed the morning the trial began. Word had spread throughout Texas about the branded women who were challenging powerful men. Journalists had come from as far as New Orleans and St. Louis. The gallery was full of spectators, some sympathetic, others clearly hostile. The defendants sat in 2 rows, 17 men, in expensive suits, their lawyers beside them. Some Izzy recognized from the compound. Others were strangers, the silent partners Whitmore had mentioned. Judge Samuel Morrison, an elderly man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, called the court to order. "This trial," he said, "will proceed with dignity and respect. Any outbursts, any attempts at intimidation, and I will clear this courtroom. Is that understood?" Hartley opened with a simple statement. "The state will prove that these men participated in a systematic scheme to enslave women through fraudulent debt contracts, physical abuse, and forced prostitution. We will show that they branded human beings like cattle, that they traded women like property, and that they profited from human misery." The defense attorney, a slick man named Richardson from Dallas, countered, "These were legal contracts. These women owed legitimate debts. My clients were simply trying to recoup their investments through legal means." "Legal means," Hartley repeated. "We'll see about that." Izzy was the third woman to testify. The first 2 had been brave but clearly traumatized, breaking down frequently, struggling to get through their stories. The defense had been relatively gentle with them, perhaps not wanting to appear cruel to obviously damaged women. But when Izzy took the stand, she saw Richardson's eyes sharpen. Here was their real target, the woman who'd killed Victor Blackwood, who'd started this whole cascade of consequences. "State your name for the record," Hartley began. "Isabella Reeves." "Miss Reeves, how did you come to be at Victor Blackwood's compound?" Izzy told the story simply and clearly. Her parents' deaths, the debt she didn't know existed, the man who offered to help, the papers she never signed. "And when you arrived at the compound, they cut my hair, took my clothes, gave me a number instead of a name, 23. Then what happened?" This was the hard part. Izzy forced herself to look at the defendants as she spoke. "They brought in a branding iron, heated it in a fire until it glowed red. 4 men held me down while Blackwood pressed it into my thigh. The word was CHATTEL." Gasps from the gallery. Several women in the audience were crying. "How long were you held there?" 6 months, until the fire, until I escaped." "During those 6 months, what were you forced to do?" Izzy's voice remained steady. "Work 16 hours a day, cleaning, cooking, washing, and at night," she paused, gathering strength. "At night, men would come, customers. They'd choose which woman they wanted. We had no choice. If we refused, we were beaten. If we still refused, we were branded again." "Do you see any of those customers in this courtroom?" "Yes." Izzy pointed to 3 men in the defendant's section. Him, and him. Richardson's cross-examination was brutal as expected. "Miss Reeves, you killed Victor Blackwood, didn't you?" "I shot him when he was trying to kidnap me and kill Marcus Kane." "But you did kill him." "Yes." "A man you claim was holding you illegally, yet he had papers proving your debt." "Forged papers?" "According to you." "According to the state investigators who examined them." Richardson changed tactics. "Before your time at the compound, had you ever engaged in prostitution?" "No." "Had you ever taken loans you couldn't repay?" "No." "Yet somehow you ended up owing Mr. Blackwood money." "I never owed him anything. He created false debts to justify enslaving me." "That's your interpretation." "That's the truth." The questioning went on for hours. Richardson tried every angle suggesting Izzy had been a willing participant, that she'd killed Blackwood to avoid paying legitimate debts, that she was lying for attention or money. But Izzy never wavered. She'd survived worse than anything Richardson could throw at her. Finally, Judge Morrison called a recess. As Izzy stepped down from the witness stand, she saw something that gave her hope. Several men in the jury were looking at the defendants with undisguised disgust. The trial continued for 2 weeks. All 12 women testified. Medical experts confirmed the brandings were real and deliberately inflicted. Document experts proved the debt papers were forgeries. Former guards from the compound, given immunity for their testimony, described the systematic abuse in horrifying detail. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. On the 10th day of the trial, a woman none of them knew took the stand. She was well-dressed, clearly wealthy, with the bearing of someone used to privilege. "My name is Margaret Hollingsworth," she said. "My husband is James Hollingsworth, one of the defendants." The courtroom erupted. Richardson objected furiously, but Judge Morrison allowed her to continue. "I've known for 2 years what my husband was doing," Margaret said, her voice clear and strong. "I've seen the ledgers. I've heard him laughing with his friends about the women they'd sampled at Blackwood's place. I've watched him count the profit from human misery." "Why come forward now?" Hartley asked. "Because I have a daughter. She's 15. And I realized that if something happened to me, if we fell on hard times, she could end up in a place like that. These men, including my husband, would see her as property to be used. I couldn't stay silent anymore." She produced documents, ledgers, letters, contracts, all proving the conspiracy between the defendants to profit from the false debt scheme. Richardson tried to discredit her as a vindictive wife, but the damage was done. On the last day of testimony, Hartley recalled Izzy to the stand. "Miss Reeves, what do you want this court to understand?" Izzy looked at the jury, 12 men who held justice in their hands. "I want you to understand that we were people, not property, not cattle, not things to be owned and used. We were daughters, sisters, women with hopes and dreams and the right to be free. What these men did wasn't business, it was evil. And if you let them walk free, you're saying that evil is acceptable as long as it's profitable." In his closing argument, Richardson made one last attempt to muddy the waters. These women entered into contracts. Whether those contracts were wise or fair is not the question. The law is the law. Hartley's response was devastating. The law also says you cannot forge documents. The law says you cannot imprison people against their will. The law says you cannot force women into prostitution. And the law says that human beings cannot be property no matter what you burn into their skin. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. "On all counts of fraud, we find the defendants guilty. On all counts of false imprisonment, we find the defendants guilty. On all counts of assault, we find the defendants guilty. On all counts of trafficking, we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom exploded. Some people cheered. Others cursed. Margaret Hollingsworth sat quietly, tears streaming down her face. Judge Morrison sentenced the defendants to terms ranging from 5 to 20 years in prison. He also ordered them to pay restitution to all the women who'd been held in the compounds. "This court," he said in his final statement, "recognizes the extraordinary courage of the women who testified. You've shown light into darkness. You've spoken truth to power. You've ensured that what happened to you will not happen to others. Texas owes you a debt of gratitude." Outside the courthouse, the 12 women stood together on the steps. Journalists shouted questions. Photographers captured the moment. But Izzy wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was looking at her fellow survivors, these women who'd found their voices and used them. Sarah, who stood tall for the first time since Izzy had met her. Catherine, who'd stopped hiding her scars. Maria, who actually smiled in public. "We did it," Sarah said, taking Izzy's hand. "We did it," Izzy agreed. Marcus was waiting at the bottom of the steps. When Izzy reached him, he pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw. "Proud of you," he whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Sure you could have. You're Isabella Reeves. You can do anything." The journey home was different from the journey to Austin. The women rode with their heads high, no longer victims, but survivors, not property, but people who'd reclaimed their own stories. But there was still aftermath to deal with. 3 nights after returning to the cabin, they woke to the smell of smoke. Someone had set fire to their barn. Marcus and Izzy managed to put it out before it spread, but the message was clear. Not everyone accepted the trial's outcome. "We could leave," Marcus said as they surveyed the damage. "Go to California like we talked about. Start fresh." "No," Izzy said firmly. "This is our home. I'm not letting them drive me away again." Whitmore increased patrols in the area, and several neighbors' people who'd been distant before began stopping by to offer support. Mrs. Henderson from Columbus sent a letter saying she was proud of Izzy's courage. Even the blacksmith sent a note of apology for his earlier behavior. But the most meaningful response came from other women. Letters poured in from across Texas and beyond. Women who'd been in similar situations. Women who'd found strength in Izzy's story. Women who were now seeking help to escape their own versions of bondage. "Dear Miss Reeves," one letter read, "I've been held in a workhouse in Louisiana for 3 years, told I owe a debt I never incurred. Your testimony gave me the courage to contact a lawyer. I'm going to fight. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Another, "My daughter was taken to a place like you described. We thought she was dead. After reading about the trial, we've hired investigators. We're going to find her. You've given us hope." Izzy kept every letter in the wooden box Marcus had made for her next to the silver ring she still wore on her right hand. One morning, 6 weeks after the trial, Izzy woke to find Marcus already up working on something at the table. "What are you doing?" He looked up slightly embarrassed. "Writing a letter to the governor." "About what?" "About you. About all of you. Suggesting the state create a fund to help women escape from debt bondage, provide legal aid, safe houses, job training, make sure this really never happens again." Izzy read over his shoulder. His handwriting was rough, his spelling imperfect, but his passion was clear on every line. "You think he'll listen?" "Maybe not. But if enough people write, if enough people demand change..." Marcus shrugged. "Worth trying." 10 years had passed since the trial that changed everything. The morning Izzy woke to find a black carriage approaching their homestead, she knew immediately that the past had finally caught up with them. Not in the way she'd feared for so long, no bounty hunters or revenge seekers, but in a form she'd never expected. "Marcus," she called from the porch, where she'd been watching their 3 children play in the yard. "Company coming." Marcus emerged from the barn, grayer now at 42, his war wounds and the old bullet scars making him move more carefully than before. He stood beside her, squinting at the approaching carriage. "Fancy rig for these parts," he said. The carriage stopped in their dooryard and a young man stepped out. Well-dressed, perhaps 25, with dark hair and cold blue eyes that seemed familiar in a disturbing way. "Mrs. Kane," he said, though his tone suggested he knew exactly who she was. "My name is William Blackwood." Izzy's blood turned to ice. Behind her, she heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath. "I'm Victor Blackwood's son," the young man continued. "I believe you knew my father." Their eldest child, 9-year-old Samuel, named for Samuel Cross, who died 2 years prior, looked up from his game. "Mama, who's that?" "Take your brother and sister inside," Izzy said quietly. "Now." The children, sensing the tension, obeyed without argument. William Blackwood watched them go with an unreadable expression. "Fine-looking children. You must be proud." "State your business." Marcus set his hand, moving to rest on his hip, near where his pistol would be if he were armed. But he wasn't. They'd stopped wearing guns years ago, when the threats had finally ceased. "I'm here to discuss my father's legacy," William said. "May I come in?" "No," Izzy said flatly. "Then we'll talk here." William leaned against his carriage, studying them. "You killed my father, Mrs. Kane. Shot him down like a dog in the forest." "Your father was a monster who enslaved women and branded them like cattle," Izzy replied. "I defended myself and others from his cruelty." "So the courts decided." William's smile was thin. "Tell me, did you know he had a family, a wife who loved him? Children who needed him? Did you know he had 43 women locked in a compound, forced into prostitution, and branded with hot irons?" Marcus countered. William was quiet for a moment. "I was 15 when he died. Old enough to understand what everyone was saying about him. Old enough to see my mother's shame to watch our family name become synonymous with evil. That's not my fault, Izzy said. That's his. Perhaps. But you see, Mrs. Kane, I've spent 10 years investigating my father's life, reading his journals, his letters, his business records, and I've discovered something interesting. He reached into his coat and Marcus tensed, but William only pulled out a leather journal worn and stained. This was my father's private diary. In it, he writes about you quite extensively. You were special to him, apparently, different from the others. I was nothing to him but property. On the contrary, he writes here that you reminded him of someone from his past. William opened the journal, reading, "Number 23 has her spirit, her defiance. It's like Catherine has come back to haunt me." Who was Catherine? Izzy asked despite herself. My father's sister. She died when they were young, killed herself actually after being assaulted by their uncle. My father was 12. He found her body. William closed the journal. He never recovered from it. That doesn't excuse what he did, Marcus said. No, it doesn't. But it explains it, perhaps. A broken boy who grew into a broken man who broke others in turn. William looked directly at Izzy. The cycle of violence spinning on and on. Why are you here? Izzy asked. If you want revenge? I don't want revenge. I want understanding. William's composure cracked slightly. Do you know what it's like to grow up as the son of a monster, to have people cross the street when they see you coming, to have no one willing to hire you or befriend you because of your name? Yes, Izzy said quietly. I know what it's like to be marked by someone else's evil. William studied her for a long moment. I suppose you do. He turned back to his carriage, then paused. I didn't come here to threaten you or seek vengeance. I came to tell you that I've spent my inheritance, what was left after the state seized most of it, creating a foundation. It provides legal aid to women in debt bondage situations. I named it after Catherine. My aunt, not you. Izzy and Marcus exchanged surprised glances. I also came to ask you something, William continued. In his journal, my father mentions other men, partners. Some were prosecuted, but others weren't. Men who are still out there, still profiting from similar schemes. I want to stop them. Why should we trust you? Marcus asked. You shouldn't, but consider this. I could have come here with guns and men seeking revenge. Instead, I came alone with information. He pulled out another document. This is a list of names and locations, places where women are still being held. Men who learned from my father's mistakes and hide their operations better. Izzy took the paper, scanning the names. Some she recognized from whispered stories. Others were new. What do you want from us? Your testimony helped convict 17 men. Your voice carries weight. If you speak out about these others, people will listen. I've done enough testifying, Izzy said. Can you really say the work is finished while other women suffer as you did? Before Izzy could respond, young Samuel came back out onto the porch. Mama Hope's asking for you. Hope, their 6-year-old daughter, named for what she represented. Their youngest 3-year-old, James, was probably napping. I'll be right there, Izzy told him, then turned back to William. Leave the information. I'll consider it. William nodded and climbed back into his carriage. As he prepared to leave, he said, I dream about him sometimes, my father. In the dreams, he's not the monster everyone says he was. He's just Papa, teaching me to ride, reading to me at night. Those memories are real too, you know. Monsters can be loving fathers. It doesn't excuse anything, but it makes it all more complicated. After he left, Izzy and Marcus stood in silence for a long moment. You believe him? Marcus asked. I don't know, maybe. The pain in his eyes was real. Could be a trap. Could be. Izzy looked at the list of names. But what if it's not? What if there really are other women out there waiting for someone to care enough to help? That night, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire and talked until dawn. About the past, the present, and what they owed to the future. I thought we were done with this, Marcus said. Thought we'd earned our peace. Maybe peace isn't something you earn, Izzy replied. Maybe it's something you steal in moments between fights. You sound like a philosopher. I sound like someone who's tired but knows she can't rest yet. Marcus took her hand, the one wearing his ring. She'd moved it to her left hand 5 years ago on their wedding day. A small ceremony with just family and close friends, nothing fancy, but everything they needed. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," he said. "I know." The next morning, Izzy wrote 2 letters, one to Jonathan Hartley, the prosecutor who'd become a judge, the other to Timothy Carroll, the reporter who'd covered the original trial and was now editor of the Austin newspaper. Within a week, both men arrived at the cabin. "Mrs. Kane," Hartley said, older now but still sharp-eyed, "I'd hoped you were done with all this." "So did I," Izzy said, showing him William's list. "But apparently it's not done with me." Carroll examined the names. "I know 3 of these men, respected businessmen. This will cause an uproar." "Good," Izzy said. They spent the day planning. Hartley would investigate the legal angles. Carroll would assign reporters to dig into the stories, and Izzy would do what she'd hoped never to do again, tell her story publicly, using her voice to shine light into dark places. "There's something else," Hartley said before leaving. "The legislature is considering a new law, the Isabella Reeves Act. It would make debt bondage explicitly illegal with harsh penalties for anyone who attempts it." "Don't name it after me," Izzy said quickly. "Why not?" "Because I'm not special. I'm just the one who survived and spoke up. Name it after all of us, or don't name it at all." A month later, Izzy stood before the Texas legislature testifying once again. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone on the stand. Sarah Mills was there now, a schoolteacher in Houston. Catherine had come from Dallas, where she ran a boarding house for women escaping dangerous situations. Maria stood with them, having become a nurse who treated women no other doctor would touch. And in the gallery sat William Blackwood, his presence causing whispers and stares. When someone tried to make him leave, Izzy spoke up. "He stays," she said. "He's part of this story, too." Her testimony was brief but powerful. 10 years ago, you convicted 17 men for enslaving women. You thought the problem was solved. It wasn't. It just got quieter, more careful. These men learned to hide better, to forge better documents, to choose more vulnerable victims. But the evil is the same. The suffering is the same. And our obligation to stop it is the same. The legislation passed by a wide margin. The raids that followed freed over 200 women across Texas and neighboring states. The prosecutions would continue for years. But there was still one more confrontation to come. It happened on a warm September evening, 6 months after William's first visit. Izzy was in the garden when she heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. "Marcus," she called, and he emerged from the house with his rifle. The riders stopped just outside their fence, 5 men, all armed, their faces grim. The one in front, a heavy-set man with cold eyes, spoke first. "Mrs. Kane, you've caused us considerable trouble." "Don't know you," Marcus said, though his rifle was pointed at the man's chest. "Name's Morrison. I had business interests that your wife's crusading has damaged. Cost me a fortune." "You mean you were profiting from enslaving women?" Izzy said, stepping beside Marcus. "I mean, I was conducting legal business until you started your moral crusade." The other riders spread out hands on their weapons. The threat was clear. "You've got one chance," Morrison said. "Stop. Recant your testimony. Say you were mistaken about the current operations, or things will get unpleasant for you and your family." "You're threatening my children." Izzy's voice was deadly quiet. "I'm explaining consequences." What happened next surprised everyone, including Izzy. William Blackwood's carriage came racing up the trail, and he leaped out with a shotgun in his hands. "That's enough, Morrison," he said, taking position beside Marcus and Izzy. Morrison laughed. "The son defending his father's killer? That's rich." "I'm defending what's right," William said. "Something my father never understood. But I do." "Boy, you don't know who you're crossing." "I know exactly who I'm crossing. And I know you're on federal land threatening federal witnesses. The Rangers are already on their way. I sent word when I saw you heading this direction." It wasn't clear if he was bluffing, but the uncertainty was enough. Morrison and his men exchanged glances. "This isn't over," Morrison said. "Yes, it is," Izzy said, stepping forward. "Because if anything happens to me or my family, there are 50 women ready to take my place, 100, 1,000. You can't silence all of us, not anymore." Morrison stared at her for a long moment, perhaps seeing something in her eyes that made him reconsider. Then he turned his horse and rode away, his men following. After they were gone, William lowered his shotgun with shaking hands. "Thank you," Marcus said. William nodded, then looked at Izzy. "My father was wrong about many things, but he was right about one. You're different. You don't just survive, you transform survival into purpose." "We all do what we can," Izzy said. "No. Most people do what they must. You do more." He returned to his carriage. "I'll keep sending information as I find it. Together, perhaps we can end what my father started." As his carriage disappeared down the trail, Samuel came out of the house where he'd been watching from the window. "Mama, were those bad men?" Izzy knelt down to his level. "They were men who made bad choices, but they're gone now." "Will they come back?" "Maybe. But if they do, we'll be ready. Because we're brave. Because we're together." 5 years later, Izzy stood in Austin again, but this time in the governor's mansion. She wore a fine dress, not blue this time, but deep green that brought out her eyes. Marcus stood beside her in his best suit, their children now 14, 11, and 8, fidgeting in their formal clothes. "Mrs. Isabella Kane," the governor announced, "for your extraordinary courage in exposing and fighting systematic injustice, for your dedication to protecting vulnerable women, and for your role in transforming Texas law. I present you with the Texas Star of Courage." As he pinned the medal to her dress, Izzy thought about the journey that had brought her here. The brand on her thigh had faded but never disappeared. It never would. But it no longer defined her. After the ceremony, she found William Blackwood in the crowd. He'd become a respected lawyer working exclusively on cases defending women's rights. They'd never become friends, too much pain lay between them, but they'd become allies. "Congratulations," he said. "It should be going to all of us," Izzy replied, gesturing to Sarah, Catherine, and Maria, who'd all come for the ceremony. "Perhaps. But symbols matter, and you've become a symbol whether you wanted to or not." That evening, back at their hotel, Izzy sat with her daughter Hope, brushing the girl's hair the same dark color as her own, though Hope's had never been cut in violence. "Mama," Hope said, "why did the governor give you a medal?" "Because sometimes when bad things happen to people, they have to decide whether to let those things break them or make them stronger." "Which did you choose?" "Both at different times. But eventually I chose to use what happened to me to help others." "Was it hard?" Izzy thought about the question about how to explain trauma and recovery to a child who'd never known either. "The hardest thing I ever did," she said finally, "but also the most important." Later, after the children were asleep, Izzy and Marcus stood on the hotel balcony, looking out at the lights of Austin. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Marcus asked. "No. I imagined we'd die in that forest, or that I'd go back to the compound, or that we'd run to Mexico and disappear." She leaned against him. "This respect a voice, a chance to change things. I never imagined this." "Regrets? About what?" "All of it. The fighting, the testifying, the constant battles. We could have had a quiet life." Izzy was quiet for a moment. "Ask me when I'm old." "You'll never be old. Too stubborn." She laughed, and he pulled her closer. "The children are proud of you," he said. "They're proud of us. We did this together. You did the hard parts. You gave me the strength to do them." They stood in comfortable silence, two survivors who'd built something beautiful from the ashes of trauma. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Timothy Carroll, the journalist now in his 60s, but still sharp. "Sorry to disturb you," he said, "but I thought you should know. Congress passed the federal anti-bondage law today, based largely on your testimony from last year. It's now illegal everywhere in the United States." Izzy felt tears spring to her eyes. "All of it, even the debt manipulation, all of it. Anyone who tries to claim ownership of another person through debt fraud or any other means faces federal charges, 20 years minimum." After Carol left, Izzy sat down hard on the bed, overwhelmed. "It's done," she said. "It's really done." "This part is," Marcus said. "There'll always be people trying to own other people. Just have to keep fighting them in new ways. Our children will have to carry on the fight. They will. We've raised them right. That night, Izzy dreamed not of brandings and compounds, but of women she'd never meet walking free because of laws she'd helped change. She dreamed of her daughter growing up in a world where no one could legally claim to own her. She dreamed of the word branded into her thigh fading until it was just another scar no different from the ones everyone carries. When she woke, Marcus was watching her. Good dream. The best. Want to tell me about it? Later. Right now I just want to be here. Present, free. Free, Marcus agreed and kissed her forehead. 20 years after that night in Austin, Izzy stood in a cemetery placing flowers on Marcus's grave. He died peacefully in his sleep a month prior, his war wounds and old injuries finally claiming him at age 68. Samuel stood beside her now, a lawyer like William Blackwood. Hope was there too, a doctor who ran a clinic for indigent women. James had become a teacher, carrying on the work of education and enlightenment. He was proud of you, Samuel said, all of you. I know. Izzy touched the headstone tracing Marcus's name. He told me every day. As they walked back through the cemetery, Izzy noticed a young woman standing by another grave crying. Something about her posture, the desperation in her shoulders, was familiar. Izzy approached carefully. Are you all right? The woman looked up and Izzy saw bruises on her face, fear in her eyes. I'm fine, the woman said quickly. Too quickly. Izzy recognized the tone, the deflection. She pulled out a card with the address of Hope's clinic. If you ever need help, she said. Any kind of help, free and confidential. The woman took the card with trembling fingers. Why would you? Because someone once helped me when I needed it most, and now I help others. That's how we change the world, one person at a time. As they left the cemetery, Hope took her mother's arm. You can't save everyone, Mama. No, Izzy agreed, but I can try to save the ones I meet. That evening, alone in the house she'd shared with Marcus for 30 years, Izzy sat at her desk and began to write. Not testimony this time, not legal documents, but a book. Her story complete and unvarnished for future generations. She started with a simple line, The creek ran cold that April morning when Marcus Kane found me bleeding and begging for death rather than capture. As she wrote, she could almost hear Marcus's voice encouraging her feel the presence of all the women who'd stood with her, remember the weight of the brand that had once defined her and now was just part of her history. The brand was still there, would always be there, but it no longer meant chattel. Through her choices, her fights, her refusal to be silenced, she'd transformed it into something else. It meant survivor. It meant fighter. It meant free. And as the sun set over the Texas hills, Isabella Kane kept writing, adding her story to the long history of those who refused to be owned, who insisted on their humanity, who changed the world by first changing themselves. The end.